And recording, and we'll get started since it is 10 o'clock. And there's my PowerPoint. And can you all see my full screen of my PowerPoint? Yeah, okay. All right, welcome to this webinar on the power of collaborative writing. I'm Jason Stevenson, the Program Manager of Secondary Education here at the OSDE. Today, there's some construction happening and a loud drill right beneath my office going off. Hopefully, you all can't hear that. If you ever need to get in touch with me, my phone number and email address are listed there. I've been at the agency for almost 8 years now, which has gone by really quickly. This presentation today fits within our agency's OK MTSS structure with the lens of evidence-based decisions, focusing on Tier 1 universal school-wide supports with a focus on academics and core curriculum with standards for rigor. Anything I talk about is typically tied to the Oklahoma academic standards for English language arts, so that's where we will always fall within that framework. We're going to learn today about collaborative writing, how to implement it in our classes, some new strategies that we might use, and then if we already practice collaborative writing with our students, then we'll have some time to share out our own tips and tricks as well, because we can learn from one another. So during our time together today, we'll determine a definition for collaborative writing. We'll identify some of its benefits, and then review some techniques and strategies for using collaborative writing in our classrooms. So we'll get started. And the best way I know how to typically begin a presentation is with a story. I attended a PK through 8 school in Atoka County in the 80s and 90s called Harmony Elementary School. And when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, my best friend was one of my classmates, Abby. And there's a picture of us together at a birthday party right there. And in one of our assignments in our language arts class, we were given the opportunity to collaboratively write a story. I still remember its name. It was called The Mystery of the Monkey-Napped Monkeys. We had both been reading a lot of the mystery series of the Boxcar Children at the time, and I think we were ready to apply what we knew about mystery books to a story of our own. And I also remember we had an illustration. My parents and I both keep a lot of things. We're not big pack rats, but we keep emotional, sentimental things. And at one point, I still had a copy of this story. But I think moving away from home into my own place decades ago at this point, I lost this story. So maybe it'll turn up if I keep looking. I really wanted to find it for this presentation, but the best I could do is that old picture of Abby and I, or of Abby and me, and then some little monkeys there. So I myself have experienced collaborative writing. What I want to transition to next, though, is a really important report that is almost 20 years old now, since it was published in 2007, but it was authored by Steve Graham and Dolores Perrin. If you know the world of research regarding writing instructions, Steve Graham is a really big name. And the subtitle of this report is Effective Strategies to Improve Writing of Adolescents in Middle and High Schools. And it showcases 11 different strategies that have proven effect size, including collaborative writing. It's one of the 11 in that report. And so in this report, they make the claim that studies of collaborative writing compared its effectiveness with that of students who wrote independently. And every single time, studies showed that when students write together collaboratively in some way, it's more effective. So whenever teachers can arrange for students to either plan writing or write together or edit or revise with one another, there's a strong positive impact on the quality of the student work. Whenever we talk about effect size, this is how helpful a strategy is. And it may be that it's just anything that anyone could do, and there's not really a strong effect, or it might be a little bit stronger. And some practices even go in reverse and make things worse for our students. But there's a zone of desired effects that really give you more bang for your buck. And collaborative writing fits within that really desired zone of great things that can happen for our students. So before I continue sharing my screen, I want to share with you the link to that Writing Next report in case you'd like to dig into it later this summer or next school year. If you wanted to study this report with colleagues or what have you. The 11 recommendations listed in this report, which is now in the chat, include things like sentence combining, which I did a workshop on that last summer. It also advocates for a process writing approach and studying models of writing, among other things. But collaborative writing is on this list as well. It's only a 70, oh, that can't be right. The report itself is quite short, and then there's a lot of references at the end. So it's a pretty quick read. Before I move on, any thoughts or comments so far? Have any of you seen this Writing Next report before, or is this new to you all? It's a great one. I highly recommend you check it out. All right, back to the slides. Ta-da. Okay, so here's 4 different definitions of collaborative writing that I found in various resources in preparing for our workshop today. And I'd like you to think through all 4, and then I want you to pick which one you feel best captures your current way of thinking about what collaborative writing looks like in your own class. There's 4 of us who are on the screen. I'd love it if we could each take a turn reading one of these definitions. I'll go last and read the longest one, but would one of you read definition number 1, please?
I'll read number 1. Students actively engaging with one another during the writing process.
Thank you, Stacy. Number 2?
I'll do 2. A practice in which 2 or more partners work alongside one another to produce a single piece of written work.
Thanks, Karen Ann.
Okay, number 3, a strategy that uses instructional arrangements in which adolescents work together to plan, draft, revise, and edit their compositions.
Okay, and 4, an iterative and social process that involves a team focused on a common objective that negotiates, coordinates, and communicates during the creation of a common document. So think through which of these 4 best captures your own way of thinking about collaborative writing. And if we have time, we're going to do this again at the end of our time together today. And instead of putting your answer in the chat, if you would like to just come off mute and chat about it and share your reason why that definition works the best for you, I'd love to know your thoughts. Or maybe they all work just fine. You could also talk about that.
I would say when I think of collaborative writing, I think of writing it together. You know, the writing is written by 2 or more people. So number 2 really is kind of what I think of when I think of collaborative writing.
Okay.
So I teach special ed, so I'm mostly resource. So I agree with number 2 because I'm usually with a small group, and so that usually helps the best for me too.
Okay.
I don't know. My 7th and 8th graders, some of them don't get along very well. So 1 and 3 work. 1 and 3 work pretty good. They get along for a while and they start fussing with each other. I guess I like 1 and 3 because one of the best ones I ever did was about Star Wars. and it was the Mos Eisley Cantina, and it came off of a book that all these different characters, the book was written from a different story. So one year I had my kids do pick a character or create their own character, and we watched that section of the movie, and then they each had to put their character in that thing, and then some of their characters interacted. So they did 1 and 3 together.
Okay.
They had separate stories, but they had like different, some of their characters interacted. So I like 1 and 3.
Whenever I was doing research for this presentation and thinking about how things worked in my own classroom when I taught high school English and creative writing, I always had my students give feedback on their writing to one another during like a revision process, but they never really co-wrote stories for the most part. We would do some of that in creative writing. So it was interesting to me to think about actually having students work together to produce a single piece of written work. It sounds like some of you do that already. So I may end up learning more from you than you all from me today. We'll see. The research tells us that there are benefits to collaborative writing. Students better understand different writing strategies, probably because they're learning from one another and have different approaches. Their camaraderie does increase unless they start fussing too much, if they've got lots of hormones in 7th or 8th grade, perhaps in Stacy's case. But they do have improved confidence in their own writing when they're working together. And the research has shown that there are lower rates of writing errors when students work together. Again, more eyes on one piece of writing typically means that more errors are found and corrected. And students just get more motivated when they're working as a team instead of alone. And then this is more like from the trenches of teachers' observations of what they've noticed when students write together collaboratively. Students who had typing skill issues, they overcome those struggles probably because someone else on their team did the typing for them. But the final products are of higher quality. Students are more willing to share their work loud whenever they've written collaboratively, and that motivation is higher. So here's a quote from a research paper written by a grad student up in Iowa. Her name is Norisa Higgins, and she had an excellent paper on collaborative writing. And she said this: the idea of writing seemed less intimidating knowing someone was working alongside you. And she was telling a story about co-writing stories with her sister and one of their best friends. So thinking back on this quote, which word carries the most meaning for you? Or which word stands out to you from this quote?
For me, I would say alongside. That way they're working together as a team, being a team to get the common goal together.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay.
I think the word intimidating is the one that carries the most for me because I am working with high schoolers. And I don't know about y'all, but for our school, our high schoolers don't really want to talk. They don't want to write. We have a lot of lazy ones right now. And so I feel like most of them are intimidated by each other that they don't want to say anything.
I think sometimes, Roxanne, to speak to that, there is this fear of putting your writing out into the world and being judged for it. Some students have already experienced the red marks from a previous teacher, and they get to us and they're like, well, I know how this is going to go. Do I even want to write? And then it can also be intimidating to write if you don't know what to say, if the assignment is unclear to you as a student, or you just don't really have a plan, and there wasn't time in class to form a plan, and all you have is the blinking cursor in a word processor taunting you. So
exactly.
I can see the intimidating, but the value of being alongside someone as well, like Lindsay pointed out. So let's talk about writing process. There are 5 stages. I think you all know these already that during the pre-writing stage is when students get their ideas formed. They do have some sort of plan. A lot of times our students like to bypass pre-writing and immediately get to the drafting stage where they just get some words down on the page. And I would always have students ask me, hey, can you revise this for me? And I'd say, no, you need to learn how to revise, which is when they add, delete, move, or replace their words or phrases, sentences. And then editing phase is when they clean things up, fix those grammar and mechanics errors. I learned recently a term from a teacher who taught middle school, and she would ask her students, why are you turning in papers to me with Christmas lights? Because the red underline was all throughout the paper and they had not made any of the suggestion corrections that the tool had flagged for those students. So she had to teach them or remind them to use their tools. And then it's in the publishing phase when students get to share out their writing, be it in a formal or informal way. So those are the 5 stages. But now I'd like us to think about them through the lens of independent writing or collaborative writing, thinking about the 5 stages of writing process. During which stage or stages do your students typically work alone? And during which ones do they work together collaboratively? And why? So that's kind of a food for thought. It's probably helpful to leave the screen share up, but at any point, any of you are willing to share out your thought process on this, I'd love to hear it. Any thoughts here?
We did even though they work alone on most of the stages, since I have 7th and 8th graders, we work on a lot of the pre-writing together. Like
Uh-huh.
I help them start their plan. They have to do a plan page. Sometimes they get advice from their friends because they can't get started. And I would
Yeah.
say that's probably when they do the most together. And sometimes I have them, they'll ask me, they want me to write it for them, of course. Like, no, do it. But they'll ask their friends advice.
Mhm.
So,
And pre-writing is
right. And then
Mhm.
sometimes, like when they're writing, like they're like, come look at this. I need help with this. Would you look at this? And I'm like, I don't speak kids sometimes. You don't understand. So they'll have one of their friends, well, you need to do this. This sounds more. So that's kind of how we do some collaborative.
Okay, great. Kind of in the same line of things. When I would give book talks to my students, sometimes they'd respond. But if a classmate said, oh, I read that book Mr. Stevenson's talking about, it was good, then suddenly everyone wants to read that book. So there's a lot more value sometimes when it comes from a classmate as far as advice or suggestions as opposed to the teacher. Any other thoughts on how collaborative writing fits into writing process in your class?
We do a collaboration on editing. We definitely try to work on revising. That's something that I need to emphasize more with my students, but we do peer editing with the students.
How does that look like in your class? Is it middle school or high school?
Middle school, so I do 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking a lot of times whenever they would peer edit, I would want them to look at the paper without talking to the person that wrote it. But now I'm kind of thinking maybe there needs to be more collaboration on the editing and revising so they could get the writer's viewpoint and they could work together on how to improve it. So now I'm thinking there does need to be more collaboration on editing, and then maybe that could lend itself to more revisions being made through that process.
Okay, great. I have a resource from the ELA framework page writing resources geared toward middle school, peer edits or peer revisions. So I'm going to try to pull that up. Did you say 7th grade, Lindsay?
Yes, 7th grade.
Okay. So what I'll put in the chat right now for Lindsay is the link to the grade 7 writing resources hub. In the bottom right corner is the section on the peer feedback lesson. And I'm going to paste that in the chat as well. There's a lesson plan for the teacher on how to roll this out, a slideshow you could use with your students, but then that feedback page would maybe be something that you could adapt or use with your students when doing that peer editing or revision feedback. All right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we're going to move along unless Carrie Ann had anything to add to the convo. Okay, all right, let me share my screen then. Ta-da. There we go. And everyone can see my full screen. Yes. Okay. So I wanted to do a bit of compare contrast of independent versus collaborative writing in each of the 5 stages and what that might look like or some considerations. So when pre-writing alone, it's maybe easier to follow your own personal interest or instincts. You, as the writer, can choose the topic, audience, and the direction of the piece of writing and organize ideas in a way that makes sense to you. When you're pre-writing on a team, be it with a partner or a small group, you're going to have some shared brainstorming time that may result in some richer, more diverse ideas, but it would require everyone to get on board for this is a topic we need to pursue. Here's going to be our purpose or our audience. And so there's going to be more negotiation in that case. And there might need to be some protocols that would help our students on turn taking or how they're going to capture ideas and figuring out who's going to do which parts of the planning, whether it's outlining or research or clustering, planning, what have you. And I saw that a chat came in. Yes, I will record this and put it on YouTube probably next week. And then drafting, you can draft in a single voice when you're writing on your own. You can control pace and structure, and you can typically draft quickly without interruption. But if you're writing collaboratively, the writing might be divided into sections or paragraphs, or co-written in real time. So that's going to take a little more effort. And then if you want your writing to have the same consistent voice, there's going to be more revision required because 3 different people might sound a little bit different each time they take over the writing. There would also be a need for coordination to decide who's going to write what and in what order. And then for revising, when you're revising only by yourself, you can reflect on the clarity, organization, and development. And you may struggle to see some weaknesses in your own writing. But whenever you're doing that as a team and looking at someone else's writing or as a single product written by multiple people, you get immediate feedback from your peers and multiple perspectives for your revision. And this typically is going to make your writing stronger. But it would also require some norms for critique, which are included in that lesson plan that I already shared with Lindsay. For editing, it's kind of the same story with revision. You can edit alone for grammar and mechanics, but you may overlook your own errors because you're already familiar with your work. If you left words out, you know where they go in your mind when you're scanning your writing. But if you're having other people check your work collaboratively, they're likely to catch more errors. And you could use a checklist or roles to check for things if you wanted to go that route. And then in publishing, a final product would be yours and yours alone to be proud of and be clear on. But whenever it is a collaborative piece of writing, there's a shared ownership of that work, and there would be necessary agreement on what are the final choices for how we want this final draft to look like. But it might also increase your audience sharing opportunities if you do that collaboratively. So we've kind of talked about this already. Maybe this can be more of a silent reflection, but will you shift your classroom practice regarding collaborative writing in any of these writing process stages? Why or why not? And we don't have to chat, but if someone does want to chime in or say something, now would be the time. Okay, why don't we move along? We'll have a chance to share out more later on in this time together. This next section of the workshop is about grouping in collaborative writing. So one thing that I learned in my research for this presentation is that there are 4 primary features of collaborative writing when students are working together in all 5 stages. At first, there's an instance of mutual interaction where everyone is excited to be together and work together, figuring out what they are bringing to the table, so to speak. And then there's a period of negotiation. What is it that we're going to write? What parts of the writing am I going to be responsible for? What will you be doing? Agreeing on a topic, agreeing on a purpose, agreeing on an audience. There's all of that. And then maybe the scariest part of collaborative writing is this third stage of cognitive conflict, where students may not be getting exactly what they want, but figuring out how to make things work in spite of that, and where they fit into the group and what that final product is going to look like. But in the end, we get this fantastic final stage of shared expertise, where every student gets to contribute and they make the writing stronger by their own contributions in the group. So there's a case study done by Dr. Ana Fernandez de Boa, who's a professor at the University of Washington, who did a case study that said, and these were with, I believe, English learners, but when students worked alone, their writing was good or fine. But when they worked with a partner, their writing improved. And then when they worked in a group of 4, the writing improved even more, suggesting that when students work together, they have higher rates of success in solving language-related issues. So that maybe tells us that our students need opportunities sometimes to work with a partner or to work in a small group of 4 in our own classes. So whenever you are structuring this and thinking about what it would look like in your classroom, you might consider grouping students in pairs. You might be tempted to let students choose their own partner, but what you could also consider doing is arranging it so that there's one partner who is a stronger writer, who would be functioning more as a mentor to the other student who would be the mentee and be learning. At the same time, there might be writing strengths that the mentee brings to the table as well, that they can learn from one another. I would not tell students who is who in this arrangement. And you could also try on multiple pairs throughout the year and change them up each time. Maybe 9 weeks, you do let students choose their partner, and then another 9 weeks for a writing activity, you pick who's going to work together. Once you have a better feel for where students are with their writing skills. You could also put students in triads or groups of 3, and then also put them in groups of 4. When you do that, you could let students choose a partner, and then you as teacher could decide which pairs of partners go together to form a group of 4, so that they could all learn from one another and all contribute in some way. I would avoid using groups of 5. It would get a little bit easier for certain students to hide and shirk their responsibilities in a group of 5 or more. So I'd probably cap it at 4. So different ways to divide the task of collaborative writing. I found 5 different methods for doing this. One method is to have one student write on behalf of the entire team. This is the scribe approach, where the other teammates are sharing their ideas, but only one person is getting them down on the page. Another method is sequential, where one person starts the writing, completes their task, and then they pass the writing on to the next person. And this can be done digitally in a shared Google Doc, but you could also do it analog style with paper and pencil. You wouldn't necessarily have to have students write beginning, middle, end. The very first person who writes, maybe they write one of the body paragraphs, and then the next person who writes the intro, the next person writes another body paragraph, and then the final person maybe writes the conclusion. But that's the sequential process. And then there's the parallel process, where the writing is divided into certain sections or units. And then without seeing what one another has written, all writers work at once. So they've all been assigned their different parts to the writing: intro, body paragraphs, conclusion, and they all just write it all at once without seeing what someone else has written. Now, there would still need to be revision after that approach, but that's the parallel approach. And then finally, simultaneous writing, where everyone is in the same document at once. There's not really pre-planning or coordination of who's doing what, just everyone's doing something. Sounds super chaotic. That doesn't appeal to my personality at all, but maybe for certain groups of students, a simultaneous approach would work for them. And then the fifth approach is a bit of a cheat, but it's using a combination of any of the above strategies. So looking at this list of scribe, sequential, parallel, and simultaneous, and mix, I want you to reflect on which of these strategies best fits your own philosophy. If you were having students collaboratively write in your class, would you make all of these options available to them? Would you only want them to use one of these approaches? And why? And in fact, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, put those approaches in the chat, and see if anyone's willing to chat about which of those approaches you think would work in your class, or you feel is most appropriate for your type of students or your age or grade of students.
At least for me, in this coming year, our 9th and 10th grade English teacher is new to high school. And so, yeah. So I think for her and for me also, because I'll be doing inclusion in her room, would probably be a mix, trying to see what fits best for that class. So it could be different for each class for me.
Okay. Is that teacher coming from middle school, from the same district, or?
Same district, but actually she's coming from the elementary.
Interesting. She's gonna have a fun year at the high school.
Oh, she is. I really like her, so I just hope she stays.
Well, I bet you can be a great support to her and an encourager to her.
That's my goal.
Because those high school babies are a little bit different than the elementary ones.
Yes, they are.
Any other thoughts on these 5 different approaches to how to draft or divide it?
I think I'm like Rosie. I think a mix for my kids. It just depends on what the lesson would be. Like
Okay.
one of the things that my 7th graders did last year, they're like, I have 7th graders, so we built a Lego town. And they each had to work collaboratively, simultaneously to build this town, but they were building the setting for their story, is what they did. So they worked simultaneously, and then they separated to do their own stories. But then they kind of interacted. So they had to create their town, their characters, build the buildings, talk simultaneously, pre-plan how's all these characters going to interact, and then they wrote. But they all wrote a separate story.
Thank you for sharing that, Stacy. All right, we'll move along. 6. Having trouble with Teams, but I think I can get it. Share. There we go. Phoebe. All right, there we go. Full screen, hopefully everyone can see. So let's talk about some roles that each student could fill during during the writing process stages. So during pre-writing, one student might want to be an outliner and write out in word phrases, probably not full sentences, the outline of the organizational approach for the piece of writing. Or it might be a narrative piece of writing, and students would benefit from having a bit of a storyboard approach where it looks like graphic novel or comic strip panels, where students are kind of storyboarding the action that would unfold. Maybe someone is just jotting down all the ideas of the group so that they could go back and reference them later. A lot of times we need to do a bit of research before we can start writing. So maybe there's one student who would want to function as the researcher. And then it may be that one student wants to be the one who leads the discussion of all the plans for what is our topic, what is our audience, what is our purpose. And they want to function as the discussion leader. Can you all think of any other possible roles that students could have during the pre-writing stage of writing? Well, let's move along. And this is a picture of my creative writing students 8 or 9 years ago, engaging in a bit of collaborative editing and revising. So possible roles when students are drafting, it may be that one student wants to be all right first, and then the rest of you will help out later. Maybe one student wants to be the concluder and write the conclusion. Maybe another student is the introducer. Maybe one student could be the typist. They're the best at keyboarding. And then it could be that a student wants to function as the voice keeper. And by that, I mean, once every student has contributed to the piece of writing, it probably will sound like 3 or 4 different students all wrote it. And so this student could go through and create some consistent word choice and tone to keep the voice consistent. And then there could be a transition builder where one student's focus during drafting is to add in those transitional words and phrases. Can you all think of any other drafting roles that students could have for collaborative writing? Okay, during revising, there could be a student functioning as an audience advocate who's thinking about the audience and what they might need from the piece of writing if anything needs to change. There could be a flow analyst, making sure that each paragraph flows well and flows into the next one naturally. So someone who's probably working on transitions. There could be a read aloud tester where one of the students volunteers to read the draft aloud to catch any errors that might need to be addressed. And there could be a style specialist who adds some stronger word choice or more complex sentence structures to the piece to improve the overall style. Can you all think of any other possible roles during revision that your students might enjoy? Okay, editing, I think I had the most fun coming up with roles for this one. There could be a comma queen or king who focuses on the most correct use of commas in a piece of writing. There could be someone focused just on capitalization or a punctuation prince or princess who's kind of looking at those punctuation marks overall. There can be someone who's the fragment finder who finds all fragments and makes them complete sentences unless they were intentionally used. Someone could check citations if this is a research piece of writing. And then there could be sort of a final overall proofreader who checks everything once everyone else has done their small parts. Can you all think of any other roles during the editing stage?
So I can't think of another role, but I love your punctuation prince or princess
Okay.
because even my own daughter, who's a 15-year-old, doesn't think she needs it.
Oh.
And yes. And so I think more of that is because of texting and voice
Yeah.
texting. And so I love that one. That one's my favorite.
Okay, thank you. Publishing, I had not as many ideas here, but there could be someone working on the design of the document, what it looks like, what font are we using, or line spacing. But if you have MLA expectations, it's probably Times New Roman, 12-point font, double space. But if there's room for design, then you could have someone be in charge of that. If they are turning in a hard copy, someone could be in charge of getting it printed. They're the printer. And then if it's going to be read aloud in class, then one of the teammates would need to be the reader of the piece of writing during the publishing phase. Any other ideas on publishing? Okay, so let's move on to contracts. This is kind of intense to talk about, but when grown-up writers out in the real world agree to jointly write something, they often do sign a collaboration contract. So if you were to introduce this concept in your class, students might treat their collaborative writing assignments a little bit more seriously. If they sign a group contract, they also might have less anxiety knowing what exactly they were and were not responsible for. So that contract can really help create clarity about who is responsible for what. So I'm going to give you a link to a contract in just a moment, and then you can adjust this contract to suit your grade level and students. I know this is a bit smaller, but when you have the link, you'll be able to zoom in and all that jazz. So on the contract, students would say their name, the name of their project, their teacher, and the hour. And then there's a phrase or sentence: we agree to participate respectfully, responsibly, and actively throughout the writing process. Each group member should initial one responsibility during each stage. And so pre-writing has some options: record ideas and topics, gather research and evidence, create an outline or plan, and lead discussion. And so as a group, they would negotiate who's doing what. And then there's a drafting section. It's the only section that has 5 responsibilities instead of 4. So one person would be responsible for 2 things. And then we move on down to revising, editing, and publishing. This all is on the left-hand column, and then on the right side, there are the group expectations to contribute, listen respectfully, stay on task, include everyone in decisions, and then reminders of when we can't agree, discuss the issue, let everyone speak, compromise or vote, and then ask the teacher for help if needed, and then everyone signs off on the contract. But you all probably want to make a copy of this so you can tweak it and use it if you like. So I'm going to put the link to that now in the chat so you can grab it and use it. It is going to come up with a Google Docs page that says copy document. Would you like to make a copy of collaborative writing contract? And you're just going to click the blue button, make a copy, and then that'll put it in your own Google Drive. Any thoughts, comments on the contract before we move on? Well, if you end up and use it and it works well, please email me and tell me so. And if it doesn't work well, please email me and tell me so. We'll try to figure out a better method. So some things to consider when it comes to assessment of collaborative writing, which you maybe have been thinking about. Many studies which observe the benefits of collaborative writing, they used individualized pre and post tests to determine students' writing abilities. So students were tested in a different way, not with that product of the collaborative writing, but with a different test to see how their abilities had grown as a result of working in a group. So for grading, this might be useful where you would consider the collaborative writing itself as a form of instruction or student learning, and less for assigning a grade and making all students share the same grade based on what the collaborative writing piece ended up and looked like. What you could do is invite students to reflect on what they learned from their collaborative writing experience, and then that reflection could become an individual grade, and then you could also use some formative assessments and other ways to see where students' writing skills are. And that may also assuage the fears of students who are working in groups and feeling as if, well, I don't want my grade to be based on how good a writer someone else is that I'm paired with, but it's that working together itself creates that learning. And then some other considerations for collaborative writing. For accountability of who's in charge of the writing, whenever you're working alone, you've got to manage that yourself. But whenever you're working collaboratively, you're all sharing responsibility for getting that piece finished, but it might be a little uneven. I know I've got PTSD still from some group projects that I had to do when I was in school. And you might be the same way, or can think of students who would say, I have to work alone. I don't want to work with anyone. Engagement when you're working alone, that would just depend on individual motivation, but often when students are working collaboratively, there is higher engagement due to that social interaction when students are writing together. And then the equity of contribution, that's not an issue if you're working all by yourself, but if you're working collaboratively, you would need some sort of structures in place, including that contract that I just shared with you would help distribute the responsibilities of who's doing what during this writing time together. And then you as a teacher, if everyone's working alone on a piece of writing, you're supporting lots and lots of individuals. If they're working collaboratively, you're supporting groups, but not as many, since students would be together instead of separate. So here's a reflection from a teacher who worked with students or had students work collaboratively. And this teacher said this: I tell students that at publishing houses, even the best writers have editors, and no writing is absolutely perfect. The more we work together, whether it be at school or work, the more we are able to get another set of eyes on the work to ensure the syntax is correct and the tone resonates the way it was intended. So even in the real world, it takes a village. And then one other quote from a teacher: this sort of exploration allows the freedom to experiment and struggle and talk through an unfamiliar type of writing with a peer without frustration and fear associated with formally grading individual writing. It helps the class have conversations about writing, and they're more willing to share their first attempts. So teachers who have used collaborative writing see its benefits for sure. So back to where we sort of began earlier on in our time together. Now that we've done some of this learning on collaborative writing, would you keep the definition you used at the beginning, or do you think you would change which definition best captures your thinking about collaborative writing?
I would say I would be a mix of all four now.
Okay, tell us why.
Mostly because since I do resource, I can't record right now. I'm feeding the baby, but
You're fine.
um, since I do resource for high school, I have ninth grade through 12th grade, and so I think it would be different for each class, and then different for each student because um since I do inclusion, I'm not just helping the special needs kids, I'm helping all of them technically. And so my approach would be different for everyone.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? I know for me personally, going into this creation of this workshop, I wasn't sure exactly what collaborative writing was supposed to look like, if it was supposed to be every single stage of writing, or does it count if you have students work together in at least one stage? And is it important that students create one single piece of written work collaboratively with someone else, or can they each have individual work, but they collaboratively helped one another during revision or during editing? And it seemed like the different resources and research I read kind of left it up in the air, like it could be any or all of these things. But it seemed like the most powerful form of collaborative writing was when students produced a single piece of writing together. And that was something I rarely did in my class. And it made me think one day, if I go back into the classroom, I would want to try that with students and see what that looked like and see how it worked. Okay, so now let's think about collaborative writing experiences, what they look like as an individual or independent assignment, and what they could look like collaboratively. I'm going to show you 2 examples, and then I'll ask you to think through how to transform one other writing assignment. So in a narrative writing assignment, we typically think of personal narratives for narrative writing, and that's not always the case, but it might be that we ask a student to think about a 5 to 10 minute moment in time from their life, and then write a personal narrative about it by using details to expand the story. You can't really have 3 or 4 students work together to write a personal narrative, because they would have 3 or 4 different unique experiences, unless you had them experience something together as an outside class assignment. So in turning a narrative writing assignment into a collaborative format, it would be best to probably go the fictional route, which also is allowed in our standard. So as a group, determine a fictional plot, characters, and theme, and use dialogue, a narrator, and imagery to tell the story. And that would be 2 different approaches to the same standard, but it would look different collaboratively. So an informative writing assignment could still include research. Independently, students might research a problem facing Oklahoma, such as potholes, and propose a solution. So it'd be the structure of a problem solution essay. That'd be an independent writing assignment. If it were collaborative and you had students work with a partner or a few other people, you could say, as a team, identify a problem facing Oklahoma and propose 2 to 4 solutions to that problem, 1 per team member. So if they were working with a partner, there would need to be 2 solutions proposed. If they were in a group of 4, there would need to be 4 different solutions proposed to that 1 problem. So seeing those 2 different examples, do you have any thoughts, comments, questions on taking an assignment you already have that's intended for an individual student and transforming it collaboratively? Do these 2 examples resonate or make sense to you all in your contexts? Hopefully they do, because now I'm going to give you a quick assignment. So here's an argument. Writing assignment for independent students, so solo. And then I'd like you all to think through how you would transform this to a collaborative writing assignment. So here's the independent version. Choose a debatable current event, such as cell phone bans in schools. Craft an argument proving your side with a claim, counterclaim, evidence, and sources. So how would you turn that into a collaborative writing assignment? What I'll do is share the independent assignment in the chat, but this way we can see one another. And the question is, how would you transform this assignment into a collaborative one? Any thoughts?
I think for high school, you could almost turn it into a debate. So having some students who look at the pros and then the other part of the students look at the cons, maybe.
Okay. Really just kind of dividing who's in charge of the claim or who's in charge of the counterclaim, or you look at this source, you look at that source.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I think I would do that too. My students, since they're middle school, when we do argumentative, we do a T-chart where the pros are on one side and the cons are on the other. I think I would have them work in teams. Like one side would have to take the pros and the other side would have to take the cons. And then they would develop that into their thesis statement and their points.
So it's almost like the students, certain groups of students who are pro work together in groups of 2 to 4, and then groups of students who are con work together in groups of 2 to 4. And imagine the benefit if students did this multiple times throughout the year, these mini research / argument prompts working on teams, instead of only doing one solo argument for like however long, 6 to 9 weeks, which is maybe the more traditional approach. I think students would increase their argument skills quite a bit going that approach. Any other thoughts, comments there? I see in the chat, Lindsay said to go along with the debate concept, you could have students construct a cost-benefit analysis of the current event. So that sounds like some multimodal literacy with math and a chart creation for the paper itself. So hopefully, based on our time together today, collaborative writing will have a place in your teaching practice in the upcoming school year. I want to thank you for your time and participation today. I am going to share in the chat box 2 more links. The slideshow is already published online as a Google slide, so you should be able to view it with that link. And then your ticket out the door for me would be an evaluation link. It's an Airtable form. So I would so appreciate it if you would complete that evaluation. It's going to ask you who the presenter was, and I'll be on that list to choose from. It will ask you the name of the event, and you can just call it a webinar. And then the name of this session, if you want to shorten it, I have no problem with you just saying collab writing. But if you're very formal and want to spell it out completely, that works too. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.